non-prosecutorial case. And it's like everybody forgot what happened to my son. And that was an egregious case. And what really prompted a lot of support for us when a friend of mine put my son's bullet-ridden body on the internet. People came from everywhere, and we held marches at the courthouse for 22 consecutive Wednesdays. A documentary was made of my son's case. The young man who made the documentary was also supposed to do a movie, but I guess funding never did get in place. So the documentary, though, was rather nice. And we just said, Jack Johnson reopened the case. He was the state's attorney at that time. And he even said that, bring me some evidence, then we'll see, excuse me, then we'll see if we can reopen the case. We had no luck with Glenn Ivey, who was his predecessor. And this is the state's attorney now that we're appealing to for her to reopen the case. And we have over 4,200 signatures on a petition that we're gathering to give to her. And hopefully she will keep her word, as she promised me before she got into office, that she would look into my son's case. So that's where we are at this particular point. But even if the outcome turns out to be what the others were, I'll continue to make sure that everybody in the county and beyond will know his name, because I've been speaking in so many places. And Jonathan Hutto was one of the persons who was responsible for my going to Durban, South Africa, sponsored by Amnesty International in 2001. That was a tremendous experience. And people wanted to know about what was happening with the police enforcement here in the county, and the high number of killings that occurred because of rogue policing. And I want to read this because I may forget it. I said, no elected official or police department will ever make it easy for families to get accountability, to get indictments, or to get jail time for cops as they continue to kill our sons and daughters. Does any of this have to do with what evidence and witnesses are questioned and which ones are not? And also the instructions given to the grand jury by the homicide prosecutor. And I relate this to the Breonna Taylor case, and you're familiar with what happened with the grand jury there. And I also say no elected official or police department should compromise their integrity, their commitment for justice in order to attain a higher position. And I'll say emphatically that everybody who was involved in my son's case did go on to a higher position. And I believe that that's one of the reasons nobody was indicted. Our loved ones should have equal justice, equity under the law. And also, after 27 years, still fighting and uniting with other mothers. And we demand to have our voices heard. Our voices will be heard. And there should be concrete changes all over the nation, and especially in Prince George's County, for police reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mother Elliott, for sharing your story. Say his name, Archie Elliott III. I'm sure everyone on this call tonight, listening this evening, knows just how difficult, or may not know, but wants to know or understand how
So I think Sean is frozen. So we're gonna move to the next. I think he's
I'm back.
Okay, there you are.
I don't know what just happened, but I'm back. So let's take a look. So next, yes, is Nikki Owens is next.
Hi, everyone. Doc Elliott, did you have something to say? You were raising your hand. You're on mute.
Hello. Now,
yes.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one thing I omitted, and this was very important. When I talked about my son being intoxicated, I was on a Zoom meeting just recently, and a Caucasian lady said her son was inebriated. He was stopped by the police. He was not handcuffed. He was not put in the cruiser. He was not taken to jail. And she had tears in her eyes as she was relating the story. And she said the police even followed her son home. So can you see the disparities there? White folk are treated so much more differently than Black people who are arrested or who are stopped by police. So that's something, that we can really dwell on. We know that there are disparities. When you look at Dylan Ruth, who killed 9 people, and he was not killed. He was treated kindly, humanely. So why can't that apply to Blacks as well? That was the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Mother. Thank you, Mother Elliott. Quickly, before we move on to Nikki Owens, please take a moment to look in the chat box to see a link to support Archie's scholarship fund. Okay, you can take a look in the chat box to see that, to take a look at that. Up next, again, is the fearless and brave, beautiful Nikki Owens sharing her story about her cousin, Mr. William Green. Nikki, you're up.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to come speak today. I'm trying to get over bronchitis and a sinus infection, so I'm a little scratchy. What I thought I was going to talk to you guys about today kind of changed a little bit. I'm going to try to talk to you about my cousin. It's really hard for me to talk about him at this point, but I'm going to try and give it a go. My cousin, William Green, who we call Boo Boo, I've called him Boo Boo my entire life. He was murdered on January 27th of this year. My cousin was, he left a restaurant. He left a restaurant with his brother. He dropped his brother off at home. He was driving and he hit a couple of cars, and he then went onto a street and stopped the car. He was under the influence, possibly. He was not drunk. I'm not sure exactly what he was under the influence of. They tried to say that he was on PCP, but he was asleep in his car. They had to do a sternum rub to wake him up. They called a lady whose car he hit, called the police. When they got there, they did the sternum rub, they woke him up, they handcuffed him, pat him down, they put him in the front seat of the police car. He did not say anything. He didn't fight them. He cooperated completely. The police car was blocking traffic. So the officer, Michael Owen, went to move the police car out of the way. He drove about 100 yards, and then he shot 7 times. Two of the shots was point blank on my cousin's skin. He put the gun on my cousin. 6 of the shots enter his body. My cousin was handcuffed in the front seat of a police car. They tried to say that he tried to say that he reached for his weapon, but he didn't. The coroner's report showed that he didn't. There was no struggle. There was 2 witnesses. At first, they said that there was a struggle per the police, but then by the morning, those witnesses never said that. This entire situation is something that I never wish would happen to my family, but I wish that it would never happen to anyone's family. From the moment I got the phone call, I knew that this was way bigger than my family. This was way more important, and that my cousin, his death cannot be in vain. He could not have died for nothing. He was a good man. He loved his family. He loved all of us. He would get up and drive to Virginia in the middle of the night to come see me, just to come hang out. He called his children every day, every single day, every morning, every night. He called his children. He loved his mom. She doesn't even want to put up Halloween decorations because he did it every year. It's hard having your family member be a hashtag. People go out and they protest and they hold up signs, but they don't really understand what it means to lose someone this way. To watch the people you love suffer and want justice, but there never will be justice. The man who killed my cousin, his court date is on March 22nd. There is nothing that they can do to him that would justify what he did in that car that night. There's nothing that will make us be okay with what he did in that car. There's nothing that is going to make us forgive him for what he did. And there's no amount of time they can give him to justify what he did. This has to stop happening. And that's what I want people to understand, that there are people left behind. There are people left behind when you kill someone. These police officers don't understand this. They kill recklessly. They claim that they were in danger of their life. You got a gun. This person is unarmed. What was the danger? And then their fellow officers justify it for them. And then there's no justice. But they expect us to be okay with it and say, okay, well, you know, they looked at the evidence and they're okay with this gun being held and a trigger pulled against an unarmed person, a person who could not defend himself. But if it was something that I did, if I pulled a gun on an unarmed person, I'd be in jail. I'd be in prison. It's like they are above the law and they know that they're above the law. So they continue to do these things. And it's something has to change. We have to be the people to change it. We can't just stand idly by. And I'm willing to use my voice. I'm willing to use everything I have to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. There were so many red flags just for this officer to kill my cousin. My cousin should be here. And there are so many other officers that are just like this man, still on PG County Police Force, and still on so many other police forces. He is not a unique situation. He is more the rule. He's not an exception. He is the rule. His behavior is how they all behave. And at some point, we just have to get the people in office that realize that this is a problem and they're willing to fix it. We can keep talking to them and we can keep telling our stories. But the thing is they're not listening, because our stories doesn't benefit them financially. Our stories doesn't benefit them in their career. Our stories are a problem to them. They're not a solution to them. They want to amend things and they want to reform things instead of just admitting it's broken and redoing that shit and just saying it doesn't work. I'm almost done. I just want everyone to know that my family was invited to a task force meeting today. I speak on behalf of my aunt for everything. I always have. They're aware of this. I don't believe this was not a public meeting. They're having their public meeting next week. They let me get on. They introduced me. And when the attorney let them know that I'm speaking on behalf of my aunt, Angela Alsobrook's attorney told him that I can't. So they wouldn't let me speak on behalf, because they've heard me speak. They've heard what I had to say. They don't like what I have to say. So I was pissed, and I'm pissed right now. And so I just want people to know that they're gonna try to silence us. They're gonna try to do whatever they have to do, but I'm not gonna stand by and idly let them do that. So they may have silenced me today, but they're not gonna silence me tomorrow. And I hope that we just get more and more people who are willing to not stay silent and keep fighting. Not just against PG County Police Department, against all governments that are corrupt and broken and working against us, working against all people of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, for sharing your heartbreaking story. Anyone who has not suffered this type of loss can't fully imagine your grief. Thank you for using your voice in such a powerful way. William's story is the epitome of why we're here this evening. This should never happen to another family, and understand this, that we are also your family. Tonight, if you are on this call, welcome to this family. We are here for each other, and we have each other's back, and will not continue to let the police murder and brutalize and terrorize our family. Up next, well, first of all, anybody who has been following this policing legislation in the legislature know the name Anton Black. Today, we're going to hear from Anton's dear sister. Up next, we have Miss Latoya Holly. Latoya Holly.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to tell everyone about Anton. I actually was just, when I was listening to Nikki's testimony, it was just bringing back some memories. Anton's been gone now 2 years, this past September, but it doesn't make it any easier. It doesn't, the pain is still there. I remember it was a Saturday. It was just like it was yesterday. It's just really amazing how the date of someone's death could actually be more ingrained in your mind sometimes than the day that they were born. And my mother called me, and I was busy. I'm on my phone doing things, you know. So I actually sent her a voicemail. She called me again, sent her a voicemail. I'm like, well, you know, Mommy, I'll call you right back. I'm doing something. She called me a third time, and I said, well, it must be pretty darn important. She'd call me back to back, and she didn't leave me a message, so I answered the phone. I could barely make out what she was saying, but I heard your brother's dead. I have several brothers. So, I mean, the first words out of my mouth was, who, what do you mean? What brother? And she said, and honestly, and I've had this conversation with now, he's also a late brother. I thought she was talking about one of my other brothers. And she said, no, it's Anton. And I mean, what do you mean it's Anton? Because Anton's the baby. What do you mean? And she just, get to the hospital. You've got to get to the hospital in Easton. And I'm like, Mommy, I live in Delaware. So I'm like, it's going to take me some time. I really didn't know what was going on. I get to the hospital, and there he was, laying in that room by himself. Well, he wasn't really by it, no family. It was a Maryland State Police officer standing guard over his body. First instruction they gave us is not to touch him. I could see that my brother was strangled to death. It was blatantly obvious from looking at his face. His eyes were open. No one bothered to close them. They were swollen. He had contusions on the side of his head, bruises on the side of his head. His eyes were bloodshot. It didn't register to me what had happened until I saw it for myself. And then we find out what happened 4 months later. Trying to piece it together for 4 months, you know, it was hard. It was hard. No one was giving us any answers. The police, they made sure that they spun their narrative with the news. He was on the news, I would say, within 24 hours. Some of you may know that he was accused of kidnapping a young man or attempting to kidnap a young man. I've always, in the family's always refuted that. He is a family member. Anton knew that young man very well, and vice versa. It was even the officer that stopped Anton, Webster, even said that he saw Anton and his family, our family member, that whole day, just walking back and forth in town, going back and forth, because they had to walk past the police station in order to get to where they were going. Even if they were going to the park or coming towards where my mother lived, they had to walk past the police station. And Officer Webster said, no, I saw them walking back and forth, you know, looked like they were just, you know, hanging out. So my mother and my father's attorney, they actually, one of their investigators was able to pull some video for us. And even though Webster had received the call that he had received, it wasn't urgent as far as he was concerned based on that video, because he motioned Anton to come over to his window. This is information that you guys would never seen. It was not on that body-worn camera that was released to the public. And this is video surveillance that we have. So if there was a strong suspicion that Anton was actually committing a crime, I would have think that the officer would have approached him in a much more aggressive manner from the beginning than motioning him to come over to the driver's side window of his car. Now, where that body-worn camera picked up, and I honestly have never watched the whole thing because I just refused to watch the last days of my brother, the last moment of his life. I can't do it. But I've seen bits and pieces of it inadvertently if I was reading stories and so forth. So where it starts out at, Anton's taking off running. Family, we say, well, he was scared to death. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. He brought it to our mother's attention that this officer had already been indicted for kicking an unarmed black man in the jaw and breaking his jaw in my state of Delaware. Now, he actually was not convicted of it, but it made national news. So, and Anton, he was a young teenager at the time. He knew exactly who he was dealing with and had mentioned now he's coming to our town. The residents of Greensboro, of course, voiced their opinion and their concern about having an Officer Webster on the police force, but of course the officials just disregarded the information and then of course the padding or the information that was missing as far as his use of force report, as far as his certification went for the state of Maryland, that was omitted by the chief of police. So that was one reason why he was able to actually be certified in your great old state of Maryland, where he cannot work in my state ever again as a police officer. And he actually lives here. It's about 20 minutes from me. So I do apologize. It's just so much information, and I want to give everyone else a chance to speak because our voices need to be heard. It's so hard. It's so hard. Like Nikki said, you don't want your family member to be a hashtag. And when I saw Anton's name after the tribute, I just broke down because I don't want my brother to be a statistic. And so far, that's what it looks like. He's becoming a statistic because it doesn't look like the lawmakers want to do anything about it. They do not want to, like, fighting this Leo Boer is something that I've been doing since Anton's murder, and it's tough. They don't want to really budge on it, and then we're steadily seeing young men and women being murdered, and it seems like every other day here's a new name coming about. So, the gist of it, I know my brother ran because he was scared. I know it. Our whole family knows it. He ran home to our mother. My mother was home. Her car was in the yard. My brother jumped into his car, and he's sitting there. Webster didn't give him any commands. He just came over there to his car, broke the window, and tased him. He didn't give Anton any commands whatsoever to exit the car, put his hands up, or what have you. My mother asked him, she said, why did you just tase him like that? Oh, he was getting ready to run us over. That's the lie that they told about Anton. He was in the driver's side. He had a flat tire. That's why Anton was walking around town that day. He couldn't drive anywhere. His tire was flat. The boy didn't have a tire to change his car. So, he didn't have a tire to put on the car. And his keys were in the house. So the fact that they said that he actually was getting ready to back up and run over him, that was a blatant lie. Just like the reporting to the news, that was a lie. The car never started. His keys were in the house. That's why he couldn't even get in the house when he tried to, because he did. All in all, my brother, he was 5'10", 160 pounds. He had about 5 grown men on top of him, face down on an incline. He told them, I cannot breathe. I did hear that from myself. He said, I can't breathe. One of the other officers said, Chief, shift your weight a little. He didn't shift his weight. According to our mother, who was there, Anton's feet started kicking, just kicking erratically beneath him. And when he stopped kicking his feet, that's when they got off of them and sat him up and put him on the side of the mobile home. It was our mother who said, he's turning blue. His lips are blue. His lips are blue. Why is his lips blue? And then that's when they started paying attention to him again and trying to revive him. They gave him Narcan because they assumed that he was on drugs. According to his autopsy toxicology report, Anton didn't have any drugs in his system. He was an athlete. That's not what he would have done. Losing a family member in this manner is very crippling. It is, depression sets in. Just wondering, why did this happen? Why did it happen to him? He had so much to live for. He was just beginning life. He was 19, on his way to turning 20, about to be a dad for the first time in November. So he's got a baby girl he's never seen. He had a promising career in modeling. Actually, a fashion designer was looking for him, and she found out through the news what happened to him because she wanted to fly him to Milan and walk in a fashion show. So, we always say like he was the best of us, just because he had so much aspirations. Whatever Anton set his mind to do, he would get it done. If he, and I'm going to be very quickly. The first time he went modeling, he didn't get signed. They gave him pointers, said the things that he needed to work on and so forth. And that boy worked, and he worked his hiney off, and he was signed the next time he went. This is the first year that my mother hasn't had a birthday party for Anton. I think she's trying to move on, but as a mother, I can only imagine what she's going through, because I'm just his sister, and it broke me down. It broke me down, and then we lost another brother 4 months later because of what happened, and it was really some hard times. But I want to just let everyone know that we don't want this to continue to happen. The names have to stop. I appreciate the say his name, her name, and so forth, but we have to stop saying their names, because we shouldn't have to. They should be treated with the same courtesy and decency, like Ms. Dorothy said, that we do see white people get. I'm not saying that every white person gets that same treatment, but for the most part, for what we can see, if we compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, we're not policed the same. We're not treated the same. I really don't think that they can relate to us, to be perfectly honest. I don't know if it's something that's just going back into the history as far as the police force is concerned. I just really think that they have a hard time relating to us as individuals. I do not believe that they see us as like they see maybe Dylan Roos. They might have saw him as a nephew, one of their nephews, or someone, or a brother. Maybe somehow he was more relatable to them, and that's why they were so kind to him. But when it comes to our brothers and sisters, our sons, our daughters, our cousins, our nieces and nephews, it's just like they're treated like they're disregarded, as if they're no more than just part of doing their job, without any disregard of what lives are being affected and how they're affecting these people and their families going forward. I can keep going. I can certainly just keep going on and on and on about this, because it's just something that it needs to change. We need to make changes in our laws, and if we can't get the lawmakers to change the laws, then we need to change the lawmakers, and that's, in my opinion. I can't vote in your state. I wish I could, but definitely, if they're not supporting us, then you should not be supporting them. So I'm going to leave it at there. Thank you so much, everyone, for letting me just ramble on and tell my story. But I really do appreciate this platform and all the work that everyone's doing so that we can get justice for our families.
Latoya, thank you so much for sharing your story. Police officers have been given a license to kill without accountability. But we're not going to continue to let that happen. We will keep lifting up each and every story, and we will pass Anton's law this year. For people listening in, remember these stories and names, because later tonight, we're going to talk about what policies must be passed to ensure there are no more. We'll learn more about Anton's law soon. And also, if you're sharing your stories in the chat or wherever, use the hashtag Maryland People's Hearing. That's MD People's Hearing on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Up next, we have a powerful organizer and leader from Prince George's County who just organized an event last weekend calling on County Executive also Brooks to reopen many of the cases in Prince George's. Miss Tracy Shan, sister of Leonard Shan, is up next. Sister Tracy Shan.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I appreciate you having me here today. I'm here to speak about my brother, Leonard Shand, and tell his story and what happened to him. And for all the other speakers that have spoken, I really am sorry to hear. And it's every time I hear a story, no matter how many times I'm hearing it, it's always heartbreaking for me. I just can't. I can't go through. It's like repetitive. And with my brother, every time I have to tell the story, it breaks me down, but at the same time, it makes me stronger. It makes me know that I have to continue to fight for justice for every single person that is going through this traumatic situation. So with my brother, Leonard, I'm going to start from the beginning, and I have my timer set. At least I set it a minute, couple seconds late, but you know, you can stop me whenever. But with my brother in 2018, Officer Whiting approached my brother at a Starbucks and basically harassed him. And long story short, Officer Whiting pulled out a knife and stabbed my brother. And in self-defense, my brother did what he had to do to make sure that he can live to see another day. When everything went through, they charged my brother with the knife because Officer Whiting stated that it was my brother's knife, not his knife. But the video came out, video footage of the stores and everyone else that took video came out that says, no, the officer lied, police officers lied. They charged my brother with incorrect charges. They dropped all the charges, released my brother. And then my brother went to, who was in position at that time. He said he wanted to file charges against the officer. They refused to file charges against the officer. They refused to hold the officer accountable for what he did to my brother. And for me, that's a problem. At the time, my brother was handling it. He was trying to go to court. He was trying to, you know, find a lawyer, which is, I don't understand why it's so hard to find a lawyer when it comes to pulling cases on officers, but it's so easy to find a lawyer when it comes to pulling cases on a citizen. Like, that's mind-boggling to me. But, you know, it is what it is, you know. So my brother went ahead and he tried to pursue a lawsuit against that officer that stabbed him and almost killed him. So a year later, on September 26th, they accused my brother of doing something again at another Starbucks. It wasn't my brother, and I'm going to continue to say that until they show me evidence, because they are lying criminals, and I don't trust them, and I don't believe in them. And at the end of the day, you show me who you are, you know, and they have shown us throughout over time who they are. So we cannot trust you. And I'm not afraid to sit here and tell you to your face, I don't trust you. So you can't tell me anything. You have to show me proof. You get me? So at the end of the day, they approached my brother again at a Starbucks. My brother held his hands up and was like, I didn't do anything wrong. He's engaging with them, talking, say, I didn't do nothing wrong. Why are y'all harassing me? And they made attempts to kick my brother in his back, hit him with the car, shoot a stun gun at him, and do all these things to him. And they never think to call the medical unit. The whole time my brother was sitting there, he was telling them, Officer Whiting tried to kill me last year, and y'all are back to finish the job. Does that sound like a person that's in their right state of mind that is comfortable with talking to police? Because it doesn't sound like it to me. The medical unit should have been called and they were not called. The family should have been called and they wasn't called till after the fact. The crisis center, any type of unit that was able to help, was not addressed during the time when the officers was basically egging him on, trying to make him do something. And when he kept saying, Officer Whiting, he lifted up his shirt and he showed them the stab wounds and kept telling them, Officer Whiting tried to murder me last year, and y'all are back to murder me again this year. And they continued on. And this is what happened. An officer fired a beanbag. Within seconds later, an officer threw a flashbang. Flashbangs are not supposed to be used. They were not trained to be used in the state of Maryland, or unless you're on SWAT. So therefore, it should not have been used. When they fired the flashbang, other officers have stated, we didn't know what happened. We thought a gun went off, and they started firing at my brother, multiple shots, killing him. He ended up landing on the ground in a fetal position. And Mount Rainier was the only department that sent out their video. Prince George's County still have not given their videos to the family. Hyattsville still have not given their videos to the family. And the grand jury did not indict the officers at all. And there's so many things that went wrong in this position to where at least, at bare minimum, The person that shot that flashbang should have been indicted. And even the person that shot the beanbag should have been indicted at bare minimum. But because the DA has to tell their story and you can't hear the story from the other attorneys on the other side, which that's not fair, because when we go to court, we got to present both cases to a jury. But this grand jury, they only get to hear one side. They decided they was not going to indict. When I went to file a complaint against the officers, Hyattsville told me, we're not taking complaints. We're not going to take any complaint from you, and we're not going to open up the case. It's already closed. So we just have to go with our civil suit. And to me, that's not fair. You understand? So with all this being said, and the injustice that has happened to my brother and to all the other speakers on this panel and other speakers that speak in other states, this is ridiculous. The government needs to change their laws. They need to repeal the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. They need transparency, because we cannot trust you. If you want all of our information when we apply for anything, you want us to show you our insides and our outs, our skeletons, but you won't show us your skeletons. But as time goes on, I keep saying it, long run, short catch. As time goes on, your dirty laundry keeps being revealed to the public. And you have all these people on these panels that is willing to tell your dirty laundry, that is willing to tell what you're not doing right, because you want a higher paycheck and you want to get a higher position within the government. And then you don't realize that your day will come. There's going to come a time where you have to face all your judgments. But you don't care about that. All you care about is what's going on today. So I'm just here to speak on this, to tell everyone else that is listening outside of the people that I can see on this panel, that you need to step up and you need to help the fight. I know you cannot even comprehend how we feel. You can't even begin to understand what we go through at nighttime when we think about our family members that we have lost. You can't even fathom the thought. But if you don't stand up, I promise you, if it's not your family member that will get shot down in the middle of the street in this lifetime, it will be your grandkids, your kids, and so on. You get me? So you have to stand up and fight. And that's the only thing that keeps me going. My whole objective was just to run my business, take care of my kids, and have a great family. But then when they killed my brother, I can't even follow that no more. Now I got to stand up for all of you sitting out there saying, what's the next problem now? This is the next problem, and it has been problems for decades. Blacks and Latinos do not have a voice, and they keep shutting us down, and they will not continue to do it. We need to learn our laws. We need to learn what needs to be replaced, what needs to be repealed, what needs to be adjusted, and we need to get corruption out of our government. And I don't care how long it takes, whether it's in my lifetime or not, but they will not shut me up. As I said before, they will lay me down before I shut up. And any dirty laundry I know about, so don't let me find out, I'm going to spill it. And to let everybody know how to fight against you and what we need to do to get you out of office. And that goes from Angela Also Brooks, that goes from Aisha Brave Boy to Ahmad Awad to Officer Whiting to all the other 10 officers, to everybody else that feel like white power matters. We're going to show you white power don't matter no more. It's everybody that matters. And if you don't want to make us matter, we're going to show you, we're going to make you make us matter. Okay. Thank you, and you have a good day.
Thank you, Tracy, for sharing that story, for sharing your story. If Tracy's story or any of these stories moves you to fight, we're here for the fight. We're going to organize together, and we're going to win. At the end of the program, we will be sending out a link for you to fill out if you want to march with us, rally with us, call legislators with us, and fight with us. Thank you again, Tracy, for sharing that story. Some of you, many of you already know about our dear sister Corinne Gaines, who was taken from us. I know many of us from Baltimore know her story very well. I've written about her story. I've reported on it extensively. Well, now we're going to hear from her mother, her powerful mother, Miss Rhonda Dormis. Rhonda Dormis, mother of Corinne Gaines. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm trying to myself together. You know, our stories hurt us, but other stories hurt us just as much. And so when I hear stories, I relive their story and my story. So again, thank you. My name is Rhonda Dormis, and I'm the mother of Corinne Gaines. My 23-year-old daughter was killed August 1st, 2016, by Officer Royce Ruby of Baltimore County Police SWAT because she refused to surrender her body to the law enforcement who illegally gained entrance into her house by obtaining the key from the landlord to pick her up on a failure to appear for a traffic violation. So where do I start? I know on August 1st, 2016, I got a text from my daughter that I didn't see right away saying that someone was gaining entry into her home. And I'm like, oh my God, like what's going on? And so I didn't, respond to her then because the text was late. Well, I responded to her, but I didn't get a text back from her. And then I get calls on the phone and see the TV breaking news that a woman is holding her child hostage in her home after police went to with a body attachment for a failure to appear. So then I realized this is my child. And so I'm now trying to make my way to my daughter's home, which she shared with her two children, my grandson, Cody, who was 5 at the time, and my granddaughter, Carson, who was 14 months, and her boyfriend, Kareem Courtney. So he gets to call. Kareem is taken into custody, and he calls me, and the first thing he says to me is they're going to kill Corinne. And so now I'm in a tizzy because I'm like, you need to tell me what's going on. But the officer who had arrested him didn't realize he had his phone and took the phone from him. So I'm now trying to, talk to the officers, like what's going on. And he said, well, it's too late now. And I mean, what's too late? I said, I'm her mother. I'm Corinne's mother. I'm on my way. And he was basically still, insisting that it was too late for me to come or my presence, anything wouldn't be of value. So I get to the scene. I have a cop escort me because it was a lot of traffic. I had to pulled over, asked the cop, told the cop what was going on, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. And he escorted us to the scene. Got there, the police, I had my phone in my hand because my daughter had a depression issue. She had suffered a mild breakdown the year before. We're not quite sure what it was about, but she would have these crying fits. So she had a therapist. So I go to the scene with my phone in my hand with the therapist on my phone. So the lead negotiator, so he said, took my phone from me while the therapist was on the phone and hung it up and said, we'll call when we need them. So I'm like, what's going on? So they immediately asked us to see my phone. Little did I know that they weren't going to give me my phone back. So now myself and about 8 other family members show up to the scene, and we're in the staging area, where they're holding everybody and they won't let anybody speak to her. She's streaming live on Facebook and Instagram. And because they had my phone, I had no way to communicate with her. But my family members that showed up, they were watching and, I guess communicating with her the best way that they could. So hours and hours went by. The officers are telling us we got it all wrong. It's not that serious. First, they say the warrant wasn't for her, it was for her boyfriend. And they just kept coming back with all kind of convoluting stories, like I guess trying to calm us or, distract us from, what was going on. So every time people got up to go to the bed, you can go to the bathroom without a police officer with you. And I'm like, well, what's going on? So again, I'm begging them, let me speak to her, let me talk to her. I can have her come out. And they're telling me that having me speak to her would offer a finality for her. And that's the time when people do things to themselves after they're able to speak to a family member and all this kind of stuff. So I'm like, well, I'm her mother. I could get her out. I can talk her out. Mind you, she was traumatized. She had the same issue that Tracy had. She did not trust police. After the Freddie Gray and other little incidents that had taken place, she had a traffic stop that she refused to get out of her car because there were some other things going on where someone had actually removed her tags off her car and left an NVA sticker card. And I still have the card to this day with the number on it under her windshield wiper. So, she was driving around. She had made up a tag on there. So anyway, she refused to get out of the car, and that started a whole incident where they took her into custody. while in custody, she was left unattended. She was pregnant with twins at the time. She was given no food, no water, they put her in seclusion, as a matter of fact. When I would call to find out if they had processed her in, there was never any, for all the time that she was there, they could never tell me whether she had been processed in or not. And I'm backwards and forwards. I'm sorry, because it's a lot. So this incident took place before the house situation. And I'm just giving you a back look at, why she felt the way she did about police. So, again, the Freddie Gray thing, them taking her into custody, her losing the twins. She had told him that she wasn't feeling well when they had her in what is it called, seclusion for hours. She cried and stuff. So that night, before they would release her, she cried enough that they took her to Northwest Hospital in Baltimore County. About 3:00 in the morning, I got a phone call from an ambulance attendant who had saw her earlier that day when they took her to the hospital. And she said to me, "Don't speak, just listen." She said, "I'm the same attendant that took your daughter to Northwest yesterday. And I'm picking her up now from the police station, and she has had no water, no food, and she's been in isolation." Now, my daughter was able to get this paramedic this information to call me. And so with that, she told me to get a lawyer. So I'm like, okay, so I'm like, all right, so what's going on with my daughter? She said she hung up, basically. She hung up. There's nothing else she can do for me. So they released my daughter that night. They didn't even take her back to the station. They released her from the hospital, which I had never heard them doing before. Normally, if they process you in, they process you out, even if you have to go to the hospital. They still have to take you back to the station and process you out, but they didn't. They released her. They didn't give her any paperwork or anything but the things that she had that they grabbed prior to her being taken to the hospital. They didn't bring any processing paper. So later on, fast forward, as she goes back to the police station to request her information about her court date. She actually videoed this. She had the video of her going to the police station, letting them know who she was, letting them know that she hadn't received any documentation for her return to court for this case. The officer told her he remembered her, but he wasn't the one that was there that could provide her with this information. I don't know how, if that stuff should be in the system. So she, finalized it there. She said, "Well, I don't know, what to tell you. Y'all didn't give me my paperwork." So fast forward again back to the house. We're sitting in the staging station, and it's about maybe 3:00, 3:30. Her live feed goes down. And so my family that was there that had access to, to her live feed, it was like her feed went down. And then a mysterious message came through on Messages saying, "I'm just over it. I'm sick of this. Like I give up." So it didn't even sound like her. But within 3 minutes, she was shot. And because and I forgot to mention, she did have a shotgun. When they came through her door, she had her legally owned shotgun. She was sitting on the floor. Again, somebody was coming into her house who didn't live there. Everybody who lived there was behind the door with her. And if you don't announce yourself and you have a legally owned shotgun and somebody's coming in your house, you have a right to protect your home. So I didn't find out that they had shot her until I ran outside, because all of the officers that were in there in the staging center abruptly left out of the room, and everything got quiet, and some other officers came in. So I started questioning them. I'm like, "Well, what's going on?" And they didn't know. And I honestly believe they didn't know. I believe that they were sent in to man us without any knowledge of what was going on in her place. So I leave out. They're trying to detain me. I leave out and I rush towards the officer who was with us at the command post and asked him, "What's going on?" And I said, "Y'all didn't kill my baby." He said, "She's gone." Just like that. He said, "She's gone." And I said, "What do you mean she's gone?" I said, even before that, I asked them, I said, "Can y'all use a flashbang grenade? Can y'all use smoke bombs?" They told us no, it was too dangerous because my grandson was in the house at her side, and they didn't want to run the risk of harming him with a flashbang or the smoke bomb. But you can shoot through a wall and kill somebody without knowing where her son was. He couldn't even see her. All of these things we would have never known unless we pursued a civil suit, because of course they did not indict. The fact that she had a firearm, that was a reason enough for them to say, "Oh, she asked for it." But after careful listening to the neighbors talk about the conversation that they had about her and pleading with them and asking them to back up, she would come out, and during the final shot, during the initial shot, the officer saying, "I'm sick of this shit," and shooting, and him saying that he could see her the whole time, and doing a 6 female civil jury. He stated that, and their own witness, their own expert witness, I forget what his name is, they paid him $80-some thousand to be there and testify. He admitted that that officer would not have been able to see her from where he was. They wouldn't allow our expert witness, who was, I don't know what you call him, but he was an expert in setting up angles and things like that. However, we wound up not even needing him, because the medical examiner and the evidence of where the bullet entered, which was through the side of the wall, hitting her in her back while she made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my grandson. He hit her in her back and went through both of her lungs. The medical examiner says she died within seconds to minutes. And then after a few minutes, he went in and stood over her and engaged her 3 more times, center mass, which is when they think my grandson was hit the second time, because he was shot in his elbow by the bullet of the officer, the SWAT team member. And then after he shot my grandson through the wall, when he went in the home, shooting her 3 more times, a ricochet hit him in his face, hit my grandson in the face. The narrative that they put out was that my daughter shot him, or was something from a shrapnel from her gun. Well, when it all panned out, she never shot her gun. She was in a tank top dress. She had a tank top dress on. She had not an ounce of gunpowder fluid on her, and where her gun was not in the proximity where she could have even shot anybody, shot the gun. Just all the evidence laid out in court. And then the fact that all of the other officers stated that they basically weren't in danger. They don't know why he shot. Okay. So, at the onset, it looked like a cut and dry case. That's why we have to control the narrative and get in front of these lies that they put out to cover their asses while they're breaking policy. On the stand, Tyrone Powers, who is a big in the I guess in SWAT and teaching and going to the different training centers, he even said shooting through the wall was not acceptable. They were not trained to shoot through walls when they could not see a target, which is this reason why he shot her in the back and also shooting my grandson. If he saw her eyes or saw her raising a gun, she would not have been shot in the back. And that was based on the evidence that was presented in the court case. So fast forward 3 weeks of testimony from I don't know how many witnesses, expert and everybody. The jurors had to answer one question. Was Officer Royce Ruby's first shot reasonably objectionable with what he knew? He knew that my daughter was in the kitchen with my grandson that he admitted he could not see. He stated in deposition that he aimed high enough to see her, high enough to hope that he would hit her in her head so he wouldn't hit my grandson. This is what he said in deposition. But then when he gets in court, he says that he sees her raise her gun. So which one is it, mister? You can't have, the truth does not need any alterations. You said that you saw her raise a gun, and then you said that you were aiming at her head because you couldn't see her in trying to prevent from hitting my grandson. All this thing came out in court. 3 weeks later, the jury answered that question. They answered, was this officer reasonably objectionable, knowing what he knew, shooting through the wall to try to finish it, like he said, to end the threat? He said that he thought she was going to kill my grandson, which that is furthest from the truth. My daughter loved her kids beyond measure. Okay, so the jury came back and said that it was unreasonable for him to have taken that first shot, which they awarded the family $38 million, 34, I think, goes to my grandson. The balance of it goes to my granddaughter, and some was divided up between myself and her father, who is deceased now. The judge goes and overturns it. He overturns a jury trial saying we tricked them, saying that they felt sorry. No, they heard evidence. They heard the evidence. These are people that took 14 days out of their lives to be on this jury and listen to all these weeks of testimony, and just to have the judge come back and impose his will, former law enforcement, may I add, impose his will on what they had come to the conclusion on. So we went to court too. We took it to appeals court. Appellate court, July 1st of this year, of 2020, decided that the judge misused his discretion. His name was Officer Mickey Norman. Mickey Norman was his name. They found that he abused his discretion by overturning a case that was a jury trial. And we didn't ask him to preside over a trial. We asked a group of our peers to preside over this case. And here you come and overturn it as though it never happened. He wanted either a new trial or just to overturn it like it was never even there. So now our biggest dilemma is that the appellate court did turn it back over into our hands, but they turned it also back over into his hands, which makes no sense. So we're in court now fighting at a higher level to have him removed from the case. Why would they put that judge back on a case that he's already been found that he was unreasonable with, that he overstepped his bounds with? That makes no sense at all. Any prudent person wouldn't put a case back into the hands of a person that was already opposed to it. So again, even when we have some semblance of justice or what looks like justice, they always have a way to come back in and sort of side rail you. They want to keep it tied up. Money is not the issue. It was getting the truth out. That was my main objective in this civil case, because many of us, we don't get I can't think of what I'm trying to say. We don't get them indicted, and we don't get the truth, camera footage, records. They just hold on to stuff. I was blessed enough to jump on it immediately and have an awesome lawyer, J. Wendell Gordon, and he had a team working with him who was able to extract what they were trying to cover up. And that's what they do. They cover up. In my case, his fellow officers admitted that they were not in danger, that they don't really understand why he shot. So, again, it's the narrative, the struggle that the families go through. My family has been turned upside down. I'm talking down to the babies. My grandbaby, who spent a lot of time, my grandbaby Variah, who spent a lot of time with my daughter. She did my grandbaby's hair. She wouldn't let anybody touch her hair for about 2 or 3 months because she was waiting for her TT to come back and do her hair. And I remember her mother calling me, crying to me, telling me, how do I explain to her that she has to get her hair done because her aunt isn't coming back to do her hair? She's dead. Family members calling and crying in the middle of the night, my kids having panic attacks. And I got grown kids, 30, 36, 15. My kids struggle. My family struggle. That's why I understand what Latoya and Tracy, they're going through, because it's not just us. It's systemic throughout the family. It breaks the family fight. Depression, anxiety. I'm sitting here doing painting while I'm doing on Zoom because my nerves are so bad. That's my therapy. The families are affected in a way that people will never understand. Financially, emotionally, you just can't function the same. I don't know how to explain it. You just cannot. You have to get used to this new normal. And it's so hard to get up every day. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter that I have to, manage with online schooling, which I really enjoy. It's frustrating, but I enjoy just being with her. If I didn't have her here, y'all might not be talking to me. I probably would have went somewhere and just died. I'm telling you, the emotional trauma is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I don't even have any more tears to cry. I don't know. Thank you for hearing me. It's just a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I've reported on this story extensively. I know the details inside and out. It's still hard for me to wrap my mind around it. Thank you. Powerful mothers like you endure the unspeakable, yet you continue to lift us up and carry us through this movement. So we thank you for continuing to lift us up and carrying us through. I have to remind our last three speakers, unfortunately, our time is getting short. So we're asking, if possible, we know the passion is incredible and you get caught up in the emotion of the story that you're telling. And it's super important for you to share the details, and we appreciate you. Our time is getting short. So if you can possibly keep your time to under 5 minutes, it would be very helpful as we move forward in the program. Up next, you're going to hear a powerful story of a man who was wrongfully convicted and exonerated after serving over 30 years, Mr. Eric Simmons. Eric Simmons wrongfully convicted and exonerated after serving over 30 years. Mr. Simmons, thank you for sharing.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Anyway, listen to the previous stories, they heart-wrenching. And of course, I'm on the other side of this issue, and in respects to, I still have my life, and so many family members that spoke have lost loved ones. But this issue of police reform in Maryland, Baltimore alone, around the United States is such an important issue. I was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. As the people before me were talking about, that we have a level of corruption in the Baltimore City Police Department that ranges to maybe 30, 40 years back. I just spent half of my life in the place. And it's getting emotional because when you go into a place like that, I like to say that I was around the greatest criminal masterminds in the whole state of Maryland in that place. And the only thing you can do is try to survive, period. At the hands of the Baltimore City Police Department, who like killing, who like framing, who like breaking law. They are more criminal than some of the men that I spent 25 or 30 years in there with. Because men in there, they have some redemption. The Baltimore City Police Department, in the eyes of anyone, wouldn't have redemption because they still do the same thing over and over and over. So you said under 5 minutes, so I just speed it up a little bit. Me and my brother, we got exonerated last year. After that, the Baltimore City Police Department and these particular detectives have been implicated in at least 5 or 6 other cases, withholding evidence, lying on the stand, and framing people. One in particular, this guy, Robert Patton, who was a homicide detective, he was just recently, maybe a few years ago, barred from giving testimony in the state in Baltimore City Circuit Court because he has been reprimanded a few times about withholding evidence. Police reform inside and out is important, and I just wanted to share that with you, my part of the story, because like listening to these people who lost their loved ones, and there every day was a day of survival. I saw so many dudes die at the hands of other inmates because I knew at least 8 of them that were innocent, and I know 2 people who lost their lives personally in there that was in there for crimes they didn't commit. And just thinking about Corinne's mother and Miss Latoya and Miss Tracy before them and the people that spoke before me, I used to look at TV and I saw all of these cases daily as they played out. And these people are still, most of them are still in positions of authority. They are still in positions of influence and still have the power to frame people or kill people. And that's why this is so important about this police reform, inside and out. Out in there, I know we running short on time. I thank you for your opportunity, and my prayers go out to everybody on the panel that spoke before me, because I couldn't even imagine losing a loved one at the hands of the Baltimore Police Department. But I am somewhat sympathetic because they took half of my life away. And I'll end with this. I was interviewed by the Washington Post, and they asked me about getting out and they haven't passed the compensation bill in Maryland, but they compensated some people. And the last question she asked me was, how does this feel about being compensated? And what would it do for you? I always end by saying that most of the time, even what Kareem was talking about, even when you awarded something, it doesn't change anything, because at the end of the day, what that money can't do, what they can't do, they can't bring back my mother who died when I died in 2009. They can't bring back the 30 years that I was in jail. They can't bring back all the years that I was beaten by police and put in solitary confinement for 300-400 days at a time. So we, at the end, people think these people get compensated or some just sense of justice come. No justice come, because you still got to go live on your life after being in there. And I'm saying I still have nightmares that they're going to knock on the door and lock me up. I can't even go into a supermarket because the speakers in the supermarkets sound like speakers in a jail. So you never get it back. And likewise, they never going to get their family back no matter what. So, it's just really, really important that we try to do something about this at the base, at the foundation of it. And, not at the tail end of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Eric, for your continued strength, sharing your story with us and inspiring us, continuing to inspire us. And tragically, there's hundreds of brothers and sisters like you who have been wrongfully convicted and then later exonerated. So we appreciate you continuing to share your story. Next up, we're going to go to a woman who most of us know her work, know her story. Miss Tawana Jones, my sister Tawana Jones, the sister of Tyrone West, a fierce activist who has been fighting against police brutality for years since Tyrone's death. Tawana, thank you, sis, for sharing.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Thanks for everybody. And my heart goes out to that brother, Eric, that just spoke, that they just basically took his life away from him. Reminds me of Keith Davis Jr., what they're actively trying to do right now. And my sister Rhonda, Tracy, Latoya, and Miss Dorothy. Like, it's a shame that we have to lose our loved ones the way we do. But real quickly, I'm going to dive into my brother, Tyrone West. This was my everything, my big brother. But let me go into the fact that 379 weeks, 2,654 days nonstop, the West family, the West Coalition has been fighting nonstop for accountability, not just for my brother Tyrone West, but for all the victims of police terrorism. It's a shame and needs to stop. But on July 18, 2013, my brother Tyrone West was brutally executed right here in Baltimore City, beat to death by 11 to 15 armed men and women, beat to death, life snatched for no reason other than driving a nice vehicle in America while being black. And giving someone a ride should not result to you being brutally murdered. And the saddest part that sickens me, and I thank you, Sean, because I remember you were the first one to make the connection about Killer Ruiz. Ruiz and Chapman, listen to these names. These are repeat violent offenders that are actively working for Baltimore City Police Department. Ruiz is now a sergeant. He just married a state's attorney. Her name is Michelle Battle. And this is sickening. This is the reality of all the corruption here. I call this Be More Credit. This is where I'm from, a city that I used to love. I can't even stand to say the name. I can't even say Baltimore anymore. Be More Credit. They change commissioners like they change clothes. And for the simple fact that we done met with mostly, like since 2013, my brother was beat to death. The first two, Ruiz and Chapman, pulled my brother out by his dreadlocks for no reason. Started beating my brother. And then they made a fake Signal 13 because Chapman sprayed so much, a pepper spray. He tased my brother Ruiz tased my brother 4 times in his neck. Chapman unleashed 2 cans of pepper spray on my brother. Nobody thought about his eyes, but the only reason why he called that fake Signal 13 was for his eyes. The only reason why paramedics showed up at that scene, they didn't show up for one dead man. They showed one dying man that became dead on their account. They showed up for Chapman's call. And it is utterly ridiculous. But the fact that Ruiz is a part of the gun trace task force, the elite gun trace task force, that ultimately murdered Sean Studer. And yes, I said that he was supposed to testify and they wiped him out. Be more credible. Let's be crystal clear. I have no problem with calling a spade a spade. The corruption has to stop. But for each commissioner to meet me, for Commissioner Davis to meet my family and sat down and say, oh, we're so sorry. And he turned right around and give Chapman reward for murdering my brother. Like, really? You give him a promotion and a reward? Are you kidding me? And then when I met with the new commissioner, Commissioner Harrison, and I'm like, oh, we're going to finally get accountability for do this. We done spent the night in Annapolis fighting for this officer killer rights, which is the Leah board. I call it the killer rights because they place these officers above the law. And it's not right. They get immunity while they kill us. It used to be the 10 days. Now they knocked it down to 5 days. They shouldn't get no days because if I murder somebody, they're dragging me in if I even make it through the court system. But they're going to drag me in and you probably never see me again. Probably don't never get a bail with anything. But the fact that these killer cops are placed above the law, it needs to stop. And for the fact that this protest been going on so long, this movement, it saddens me because before Freddie Gray laid on that ground, because he made contact with killer cops, laid on that ground, fighting and dying for his life, and they rather blame a van than men that beat him to death and dragged him in there like he was roadkill. You get what I'm saying? But they don't care. They don't give a damn about it. There is no justice. It's just us trying to hold folks accountable. And if you're sitting back right now and you're watching this and you're kind of scratching your head, not believing this, something is wrong with you. And until your family feels this pain that no family should feel, you have to do something now. The time is now. Enough is enough. And as I go through each one of these phases of testifying, it's always a new victim. It's always a new victim. Just like with the new victim, Walter. Gunned down, a knife. It's almost like you bring a butter knife to a gunfight. Mental health issues should not result to someone getting executed. Just like in Corinne Gaines' case, they came out, they tried to kill her, and not only her, her baby. And they cut her Facebook live. Enough's enough. The time is now. But then I have a problem with saying, oh, but these police officers need more training. No, they don't. They're trained perfectly well. Let's talk about the origin of policing. Let's be crystal clear. They used to catch slaves and they used to kill us the same way they're doing in 2020. And let's be crystal clear, in Philadelphia, the police sent that bomb. The police, no one else, the police sent the bomb and killed families in Philadelphia in 1980 something. So let's be crystal clear, they don't need no training. Did they kill Murdy when they went into his house in the county when he shot 200 rounds at police officers? No, he got to go back in his house. He got to get on the phone and call and surrender. And he killed his girlfriend's dog. So let's be crystal clear. This is all a part of the plan to wipe us out. It's called legalized genocide. We're more than hashtags and body bags. We're more than being 6 feet in the dirt and pictures on buttons on t-shirts. Our lives matter. It may not matter to the ones that's killing us, but it matters to the families that you leave behind to feel this pain. And every time I go around the world, nationally, even in the cities that don't nobody hear about the case, every case matters. To stand in solidarity to a club that we never asked for. The pain is real. I wouldn't wish my worst enemy, do you hear me, my worst enemy, into this club. But until you guys do something done, we were standing there 7+ years telling y'all all the corruption. Y'all laughed when y'all thought, oh, this family must be crazy. When I told y'all somebody broke in Tyrone West's house 2 days after they murdered, it looked like it was a house raid. Y'all took it for granted. Now y'all see all the blood. What the hell are y'all going to do with our blood? Enough's enough, and the time is now. Thank you guys so much. And free Keith Davis Jr. ASAP. I don't want him to spend 30 years in jail before Marilyn Mosby. Get it right. Get it right now, Marilyn Mosby. Get it right. Lock up Killer Ruiz. Reopen my brother's case. Reopen all these damn cases. Mic check. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Tawanda. Thank you for all the work that you continue to do. 379 weeks and counting, West Wednesdays. Thank you so much for all that you do. We're going to fight real hard to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. The time is now to do it. And we feel your passion and we appreciate your power and your energy. Last but not least, we have a young leader that has been rising across the state, who is doing some amazing advocacy work. Michaela is a directly impacted former student with a powerful story. Michaela Wilkes, you're up next.
Hello, and I'm really honored to be able to speak and to share my story. And before I share my story, I really just want to thank everyone else who has been bold and courageous enough to share their story, because I know it doesn't get easier to share your story over and over again. So thank you for doing that for the audience and also for the other panelists. So my story is different. I am someone who's directly impacted by the school to prison pipeline. Growing up, my aunt, who I was really close with, her name was Sharon Carver. She was one of the victims that passed in the September 11th attacks in the Pentagon. And for years, I had struggled with her death. It was the first time that I had ever lost someone close to me. It was the first time that I had ever dealt with death, period. And so it was something that I didn't know how to handle. And so because I didn't know how to handle it, in retrospect, I see that I was dealing with depression. And I was essentially later on diagnosed with clinical depression. I acted out in rebellion. I went through a phase hanging around, the wrong crowd. I started skipping school and running away from home. And it was wild because my school administration, my guidance counselors, my principal, my vice principal, everyone knew what I was going through. They knew that I had lost my aunt. I was one of the people who, were a family member of the victims of 9/11. But their response was very just, we understand what you're going through, but you need to stop. Because if you don't, they're going to throw you into detention. They're going to put you in a group home, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's not what I needed. I needed someone to talk to, but instead, I was met with the criminal justice system. I was put on probation for truancy. I was put on probation for skipping school. All offenses that aren't, it's not breaking law, it's not criminal. Instead of them offering me, an ear, instead of them offering me resources, instead of them offering me someone to talk to, I was taken to jail. And I will never forget, one day I skipped one class, came back to school the next day. I thought everything was going to be okay. And I was called to the front office. My probation officer was there along with our school resource officer, who then escorted me in handcuffs from the principal's office to my probation officer's car, where he and the police officer escorted me to court to make sure that I wouldn't try to escape or run away. At that time, I had just gotten my hair braided, maybe like about 2 or 3 days before that. And so I was at school, went to the courthouse. I guess somehow they notified my mom that I would be there. So my mom was, they were waiting for my mom to get there from work before they put me in front of the judge. And I was sentenced to 10 days in jail. So for every one day that I missed the school, I faced 10 days in a juvenile detention facility. And it was really traumatizing for me. I felt like a failure. I felt like, my aunt wasn't proud of me. I just felt the lowest that I've ever felt, to be 14, 15 years old and locked up for skipping school. I was put in solitary confinement upon my arrival because I told them that I was contemplating committing suicide. And so they put me in a dark room filled with cement with absolutely nothing in it, and what they call, it was like a turtle suit or something. It was like a sandbag. And it was just really traumatic. And going through that experience, and this was something repetitive. I was arrested for truancy both in the state of Virginia and in the state of Maryland. In Maryland, I was detained in Waxter's, which is an all-girl facility in Maryland, which was very traumatic as well in itself. But that is why I decided to found our organization called Schools Not Jails was to make sure that we dismantle the school to prison pipeline. You know, hearing everyone's stories here tonight and hearing all of the stories every single day across the country, across the world, these are the same police officers that are in our schools with our children. You know, what is it going to take to get these resource officers out of our schools? It's only a matter of time before, you know, a situation that happens on the street to happen in our classrooms. These officers are armed. These are the same officers from the same police departments that are killing Black people, that are killing people of color out on the streets. Just maybe like about 2 weeks ago, it was an incident in Baltimore County where an 11-year-old autistic boy was handcuffed and detained by a police officer in school because he was having an episode and the teacher felt like they couldn't handle it. And so it's only a matter of time before things get worse. And so we have to tackle all of the aspects of criminal justice reform, education reform, police reform. But my call to action, you know, for anyone that's watching this and that's a part of this is, for one, to get out and vote. That is the least that you can do. You know, we have elected positions. Your state's attorney is an elected position. Your sheriff's officer is an elected position. Your circuit court judges are elected positions. And, you know, and our state delegates, our state senators, all these people are in charge of enacting legislation that can be more proactive instead of reactive. And that's a problem that we have. We have too many instances where we're being more reactive to situations instead of being proactive and keeping these instances from happening. My second call to action would be to definitely join an organization, get involved, find out what you can do to help people in our communities, to make the stories that we've heard tonight no longer possible, to make the stories that we heard tonight no longer inevitable. Because the sad thing is, the way that things are happening today, it's only but a matter of time before someone else is a hashtag. And that needs to stop. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michaela. We're honored to hear your story. Our young people need support, love, resources, not handcuffs. Missing school should not mean jail time. Students don't belong in jail. No 13-year-old should have to go through what you went through. But your bravery and advocacy continues to inspire us and makes a world of difference. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Now we're going to move forward in the conversation tonight. Up next, we're going to have a brief history, I believe, of policing in Maryland, leading into the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And Davon Love from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle is going to lead us off in that conversation. Davon?
All right, thanks, Sean. And I just want to say, again, just the stories really highlight the importance of why these policies are so important. And it's really, you know, the strength and advocacy and resilience of the families that have suffered the greatest loss that animate everything that we do. And talking just about the history of the LEOBR, I'm going to combine just some policing history and just jump right into the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, just a brief outline of what it is and why it's so important. You know, one of the things that has happened over many decades is that those of us that have been advocating for police accountability often get characterized as anti-police. And it is this characterization that a lot of times obscures the importance of dealing with the observable patterns of police abuse in our communities. And so when you look at, for instance, throughout the 20th century, uprisings have happened all over the United States and many of them sparked by incidences of police brutality. In 1942, there was a gentleman named Thomas Brodus who was killed by Baltimore City police. And it led to a major uprising, right? Where there was a major mass demonstration to challenge police brutality, right, in Baltimore City. And when you look at places all over the country, where it was the riots in Harlem, you know, when you look at, you know, the riots in Cincinnati in the early 2000s, there's cities all over the country, all throughout, you know, the 20th century and early 21st century, where incidents of police brutality resulted in major uprisings. And that's important because it was the police abuses that actually led to many of the advocacy organizations that were leading the way in terms of advancing the welfare of Black people. So when you think about the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, who, one of the principal reasons that they formed in Oakland, California, was to patrol the police who were abusing people in the community, and they armed themselves with guns and knowledge of the Second Amendment because they recognized that the police were not going to police themselves and the community needed to have oversight. And that was the mechanism the Black Panther Party used in terms of having oversight over the police. And so when you look at, for instance, the counterintelligence program, right, which is a program that was designed to undermine social movements, and the tactics that they use in collaborating with local law enforcement, right, to engage in political assassinations, framing folks who were engaged in political struggle. So here in Baltimore, the Baltimore chapter, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Eddie Conway spent 44 years in prison, right, as a result of this program where they collaborated with local law enforcement, right, as the way to undermine the work that organization was doing to fight for the rights of Black people. And so it's in that context, right, because what law enforcement will tell you about why the LEOBR was developed in 1974, they will tell you that it is a labor issue, that police officers were being discriminated against, and the LEOBR was a way to protect them from discrimination. But it's important for us to be very clear that the history of law enforcement, particularly the Fraternal Order of Police, that have been the public policy arm of the industry of policing, has been very clear in their in their resistance to Black folks asserting our human rights, and it's been very active in undermining our attempts for empowerment, right? So when you look at the FOP and the political positions they take, right, but the FOP has taken openly politically anti-Black positions, whether it was, they advocated for upping the bounty for Assata Shakur's extradition from Cuba, right? They are often supportive of the kinds of efforts, to undermine and to sabotage Black organizations, right? And to challenge Black political leadership. So there's a history there. So what the opposition is going to do when they talk about the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights is frame it as a labor issue. And it's important that you all are armed with the history to know that the LEOBR is an instrument that the police department, that the industry of policing is able to use to protect itself from being accountable for the abuses that it carries out against Black people and people of color more broadly. So just to talk a little bit about what the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights is, it's a legislation that passed in 1974, and it provides protections above and beyond their constitutional rights. So I'll just give a few examples. One of the most highly cited examples, Sister Tawana mentioned it, they have 5 business days before they're required to make a statement on the record about an incident of alleged police brutality and misconduct. That gives them time to get their story together. When you're talking about the entity that disciplines police officers, when a chief hands down discipline and the officer rejects it, the officer is able to appeal to a trial board that is made up exclusively of police officers, right? So police are able to control the process of how law enforcement is disciplined. Or the investigations, only sworn law enforcement can participate in the internal affairs investigation of an allegation of police misconduct. And so that allows police to be able to control the nature of the information about the allegations of misconduct. And the reason why these are the types of things that are important to know about elements of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights is because any industry that regulates itself is prone to corruption. And so we shouldn't expect anything different from an industry like law enforcement that is essentially able to police itself. And so one of the things that I want to leave you with is that a lot of times when we're talking about police accountability and police brutality, often, and legislators during some of the hearings this summer did this, where they play off against the issue of heightened levels of violence in places like Baltimore as a rationale to not move on police accountability. And I want to make a public safety argument for the repeal of the LEOBR. And what I mean by that is that when you have law enforcement that have such an atrocious record of abusing the community, right? When you think about the fact that we live in a society structured on racism and white supremacy, where people internalize notions of Black people as inherently criminal, and you have law enforcement officers and there's studies that have been done that show that they see Black people as inherently more criminal than other people, that when you have an agency that has that attitude towards the community, there's no way that any police department is going to be able to reasonably deal with the issue of violence if police are perpetrating violence against the community. And so it's really important that we make that statement to be very clear that we care about all violence, but the violence that police exert against our loved ones, right, the people in our families and our communities, that type of violence hurts every aspect of our society's ability to lift itself up. And so again, just want to reiterate, we advocate for the repeal of the LEOBR, and we're not advocating that police officers don't have rights as workers, right? But the rights that they're given by the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights are rights that other public employees do not enjoy. And so we want to make sure that we hold the police department accountable and provide mechanisms for the community to have oversight over the way that police are disciplined, over the nature of investigations, and oversight over just generally how the institution of policing is carried out in our neighborhoods. So I'll stop there in that description of LEOBR.
Thank you, Davon. Brother Davon Love is co-founder and director of public policy at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, a grassroots Black think tank in Baltimore, which advances the public policy interests of Black people through youth leadership development. You all have done mighty work in just a short period of time. We appreciate you, man. And you and your organization, of course. Up next is Miss Yannette Emanuel, public policy advocate at the ACLU of Maryland, who has been the incredible organizer of this event and one of the great leaders of the coalition. The ACLU has been working tirelessly to reform the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, reform MPIA, you name it, pulling in their team of attorneys, advocates, specialists, and organizers to push meaningful legislation. Yannette is going to talk about our second demand, reforming the Maryland Public Information Act. Yannette?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Having some internet trouble. So thank you, Amit. So I'm going to quickly just talk about reforming the Maryland Public Information Act. So in Maryland, no member of the public can find out how police departments investigate misconduct. So even if you are a victim of misconduct, all you can find out is the outcome of your complaint. Discipline if the officer was disciplined at all. You can't find out whether the department conducted a thorough investigation of your complaint or if there was investigation at all. This is because Maryland's Public Information Act categorizes disciplinary records as personnel records, and personal records are always confidential. There's no discretion, there's no judicial review, there simply cannot be disclosed. In case after case, we see police departments like in Anton Black's case, a police chief who falsified records to hire an officer with a proven record of misconduct. We have repeated cases where officers who have engaged in flagrant misconduct and even criminal conduct, and it comes out in the course of criminal trials that there was a long record of departmental charges where the officer was acquitted. Like in the case of William Green that you heard tonight, where the officer was involved in previous fatal shooting of a man in 2011, had multiple other instances where Prince George's County residents who encountered the officer over the years have accused him of brutality and lack of professionalism. Several who were arrested by the officer and accused of aggressive behavior toward him, eventually having all charges dropped because the officer failed to show up in court proceedings. So when incidents occur and the community wants to know, well, what did the department know before and what did they do about it? The only answer any chief in Maryland can give right now is, trust us, we acted appropriately and we did the right thing. And in the democracy, that is not simply an appropriate response, and certainly not one that engenders trust. And given the fact that 90% of complaints against officers that are made by the public are not sustained, it is critical that we not only get access to sustained complaints, but also unsustained complaints. Some examples of complaints that were held unsustained by Baltimore City Police Departments during the DOJ investigation of the Baltimore Police Department in 2016 include: in 2014, a middle-aged Black man alleged that a sergeant in Southeast Baltimore stopped him near Patterson Park, strip searched him in public. When the man protested and said he would contact a lawyer, the sergeant allegedly told him, get your nigger ass out of here. BPD found the complaint not sustained without interviewing any of the involved parties. Another complaint, a man was hospitalized after 2 officers slammed a man to the ground, unlawfully arrested him. The complaint wasn't investigated for 13 months until it was discovered by an auditor. It then lingered for another 4 months before being assigned to a detective. BPD found the complaint not sustained for lack of cooperation when witnesses failed to show up 17 months after the complaint was filed. The 2 officers were never interviewed. Public access to this information is not only critical to even trying to establish trust between the police and the community, but it will also prevent the police from taking any more Black lives in the streets and in the courtrooms through wrongful convictions. You just heard from Eric Simmons. In Maryland, 80% of exonerees are Black, and officer misconduct is the leading cause. A single Baltimore detective, like you heard, Robert Patton, was involved in 4 wrongful convictions and that cost Maryland taxpayers over $22 million in state compensation and civil lawsuits. So what needs to be done is the Maryland Public Information Act needs to be amended to make clear that records of internal investigations will be treated like every other police record of you and I and everyone and every other member of every resident in the state. In order to make this happen, we need all of you we need the support of all of you in getting the Maryland General Assembly to move Anton's law this session, and which is our bill to reform the Maryland Public Information Act. And you've seen in the chat how to get involved, organizations you can join. And it's going to really take all of us to make change happen, and we need change now. We cannot wait yet another session. A number of the bills and issues that you've heard tonight have been introduced for the last over the last decade, and it is way past time that we get it done this session. So thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you for all you do. Up next, we have another great leader from the ACLU, Mr. Justin Nally, policy analyst. He's been advocating for our kids in Baltimore for a long time now and is leading the charge on all things education policy. But today he is here this evening to talk about our third demand, which is establishing a statewide use of force standard. Justin?
Thank you, Sean. My name is Justin Zola. I am a researcher with Amnesty International, and I just wanted to start by doing a special thank you to the families for coming out tonight and speaking their incredibly hard and powerful truth about police violence. Following the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson in 2014, Amnesty International surveyed state statutes on the use of lethal force where they existed and found the standards used across the country are far too permissive in allowing officers to use force or lethal force. Maryland is actually one of 9 states that have never actually enacted a use of lethal force statute. This in and of itself is a violation of international law for the US's obligations, specifically under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But other neighboring jurisdictions haven't done this either. Virginia and Washington, D.C. are also 2 places that have never enacted such a law. In Maryland, 139 people have been killed by police between 2013 and 2020. 85 of whom were Black, comprising 61% of the total killed. According to recent estimates, Black people make up just 31% of the population of the state, demonstrating a vast overrepresentation in those killed by law enforcement in Maryland. This is not only illustrative of over-policing of Black and Brown communities, but a reflection on the desperate need to enact a use of force statute to prevent similar deaths in the future. Without a statute in place, Maryland relies upon US Supreme Court precedent for when law enforcement may use lethal force. One seminal Supreme Court case is Tennessee v. Garner. The principle of Garner is important. That basically states that it is not permissible for police to use deadly force to prevent the escape of an unarmed suspected felon who does not present a threat to the officer. However, Connor v. Graham, a second case that makes up the constitutional framework around use of force, established the standard by which a jury is to judge an officer's actions in the use of force, namely whether an officer's actions were objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting them, and that the reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene. General formulations such as whether an officer's use of force was reasonable, as laid out in Graham, are problematic in that such formulations are largely vague and give a tremendous amount of discretion to the individual law enforcement official, making it almost impossible to hold them accountable. This becomes particularly problematic when it comes to the use of lethal force, where in accordance with international standards, the reasonable belief must not relate to some sort of necessity for the use of lethal force, but must be the objectively reasonable belief in an imminent threat of death or serious injury to the officer or others. The lack of such language is evident in the utter lack of accountability for the use of lethal force, even in the most egregious cases. While Graham's reasonableness standards is commonplace and widely accepted by law enforcement, some states' use of force statutes incorporate additional elements that bring important clarity and even push beyond the floor set by these cases. Last year, California, for instance, amended its use of force law to include a necessary standard, which is more restricted than the reasonableness standard of Graham. California's law also asked juries and courts to look beyond Graham by considering the actions of the officer, him or herself, and the subject leading up to the incident to determine whether the actions were in fact reasonable. In order to prioritize the principle of necessity, the state's use of force law must make clear that in carrying out their duties, law enforcement officials must protect life by applying nonviolent means before resorting to the use of force and firearms, and may use force only if other means are ineffective and the use of force is unavoidable. Moreover, the principle of necessity requires that the police use only such force as is required to achieve the objective and must cease once the objective is achieved. It is also important for use of force statute to include other measures, such as banning chokeholds and including a totality of the circumstances principle, such as California's, that reviews the actions of the officer leading up to the incident in using force or lethal force to determine whether their actions escalated the situation to the point where force was necessary. We have seen far too often how officers' gross negligence may have created a situation for the use of deadly force, and it's time we put laws in place to hold officers accountable for this. This evening, you've heard from family members from a number of cases, including of Leonard Shand and Anton Black. With Leonard Shand's case, you had 10 officers responding to the incident. They initially were using techniques of communication and time and distance, but then proceeded to use force through deploying tasers, pepper spray, a beanbag round, before launching a flashbang at Leonard, as you heard Tracy describe, which is a crowd dispersal device. Police escalated force when time and distance was still keeping everyone, both the officers and Leonard, safe. There is no reason why they could not have continued waiting him out while they had complete control of the situation. The firing of 44 shots can never be justified as being strictly unavoidable in order to protect life. Yet an expert hired by the state to study the use of force in this incident found that the force used, including those 44 shots, was objectively reasonable under our constitutional framework. Under a necessity standard that includes the totality of the circumstances, it would be hard to see how the use of force would have been justified in this instance. Similarly, as you heard from Anton's family members, he was 19 years old. He was chased, tasered, and wrestled to the ground. And when he was restrained by multiple police officers and placed in a prone position until he became unresponsive and died. Despite a state medical examiner report labeling the incident an accident, a separate independent pathologist found he died from positional asphyxiation. This is why these techniques have been banned by other jurisdictions, and shows why any Maryland statute on the use of force must also include language that prohibits their use in the future. A quintessential function of law enforcement is to preserve life, and by that, I do not mean exclusively their own. Maryland must enact a use of force law to prioritize a person's right to survive an interaction with a police officer by including a necessity standard for all uses of force and limiting deadly force to only when necessary, as a last resort, when faced with an imminent threat of death or serious injury after exhausting reasonable options. It should include language that looks at the totality of the circumstances in determining whether force was reasonable, that looks at actions of the officer and the individual in leading up to the use of force. It must also include language to require officers to de-escalate an interaction first, and require that officers create no substantial risk to third parties, and require a provision of a warning when feasible when lethal force must be used. Lastly, among other measures, it must include a ban on chokeholds and other similar maneuvers that restrict airflow. This is why it's incredibly important that we get a bill passed in Maryland and actually put these structures in place so that we can actually hold officers accountable whenever they transgress these standards. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Justin, and apologies for the error with your last name. Justin Zola is Director of Research at Amnesty International. Thank you again for the critical data you shared and for your work on such a wide range of cases over the last 20 years. We really appreciate you. Up next is Ms. Monisha Shiriel. If I butcher your last name, my apologies. Attorney at Public Justice Center, the Public Justice Center. She helped launch the Maryland Suspension Representation Project and has been advocating for public school students for years. She is here this evening to talk about our fourth demand, getting cops out of our schools. Monisha, you're up.
Thanks so much. Good evening. I'm an attorney with the Public Justice Center, and I'm in awe, I just want to say, of the bravery of those who share their stories about police violence tonight. Michaela Wilkes testified about the harm she suffered at the hands of school police, and she is not alone. We routinely see cases around the state where school police have arrested children for run-of-the-mill fistfights, possession of small amounts of marijuana, simple horseplay, for trespassing, like when my 13-year-old client entered his school after the bell to call his mom because he'd missed the school bus, for malicious destruction of property, like when my colleague's 11-year-old client colored on her friend's jacket. In some cases, the children involved had histories of trauma, like Michaela. They threw a punch when triggered as a result of the fight or flight instinct they developed over years to survive. And in others, the issue was just that the child involved was a child. Their brain was still figuring out impulse control, or they didn't yet have the tools to constructively resolve a conflict. But that is all irrelevant when you're a police officer who is trained and obligated to view the world through the lens of the criminal code, even when your beat is a school building. In 2018-19, 3,141 children were arrested in Maryland public schools, overwhelmingly by school police stationed there. About 70% of these arrests were for fights not involving weapons and offenses like disruption, minor theft, and less. Most of the remainder were for drug possession, which I've seen can be as simple as having a few grams of weed. 56% of arrests targeted Black students, even though they're only a third of the student population and there are no differences in behavior across race. 23% of arrests targeted students with IEPs, often for disability-related behavior, even though they're only 12% of the student population. And you heard Michaela mention the story of the 11-year-old with autism who was handcuffed in his Baltimore County school until the point that he broke his wrist. So we are arresting kids for having disabilities. We are arresting kids on the basis of our racial biases. We are arresting kids for being kids in the places they're supposed to learn how to be adults. And with each of these arrests, we are pulling children out of class. We are telling them that school isn't where they belong. We are subjecting them to the emotional and the financial burden of navigating the legal system. We are putting them at risk of incarceration, and we are leaving them traumatized. This isn't the same as the brutality that has killed the family members we've heard about tonight, but it's another form of violence by law enforcement against Black children and children with disabilities in our state. And there is no way to justify the harm we're causing. After 20 plus years of study, there is no real evidence that the presence of officers prevents school shootings or reduces any kind of violence in schools at all. Some studies have actually found a correlation between increased presence of school police and student behavior problems. In short, the school police model has failed us, has made schools less safe, not more, particularly for students who are already marginalized. Yet in Maryland, we spend $10 million per year in state funds, on top of millions more in local funds, to maintain a regular police presence in our schools in every one of our districts, while at the very same time failing to invest sufficiently in the tested strategies that actually keep our kids safe. We know that when you build positive relationships among students and staff at schools, you make it easier to resolve conflicts peacefully. When you provide students who have suffered adverse childhood experiences with mental health care, you bring them out of fight or flight mode so they don't lash out when provoked. When you teach students how to control their emotions and empathize with others, violent conduct decreases. But to implement those evidence-based strategies, you need social workers. You need school psychologists, counselors, restorative approaches experts, community school coordinators, positions that are severely underfunded and in some schools don't exist at all. It is time to reimagine school safety. We need to stop throwing $10 million per year in our state funds at the school policing model that has needlessly criminalized children for being children while failing to keep their peers or their teachers safe. We need to reinvest that money in student mental health services, wraparound supports, restorative approaches. We need to get cops out of our schools, and we need to do it before we lose another child on the pipeline from school to prison. Counselors, not cops legislation will be introduced for the first time this session. And I look forward to working with all of you to make it law.
Thank you so much for all your work, and thank you for speaking with us this evening. We appreciate you. Finally, to speak to our last demand, returning control of the Baltimore City Police Department to Baltimore City, is Mr. Trey Murphy. Many of you know Trey from his leadership during the Baltimore Uprising. He is the Deputy Director of Community Organizing for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and a tireless advocate for our community. Trey, thank you for speaking with us.
Yes, Sean, thank you for having me, and truly thank you for the families who have shared stories about their loved ones on this topic. I think that it completely underscores the need for this moment that we find ourselves in right now to begin the tough work of actually fixing public safety inside of our state, and even going a little bit further to making sure that accountability and transparency is an actual thing, so that when atrocities like this happen, police officers do not get away literally with murder, right? On the topic of local control, I'm going to try to be short and succinct since I know that we are running up against time. But many folks may not be aware that the Baltimore Police Department, the Baltimore City Police Department, is not controlled or legislated by the City Council and the mayor, as most other police departments are. All other police departments are inside of the state of Maryland, and all large cities are across the nation, right? So what we are talking about is Baltimore as an outlier, which seems to be the case oftentimes because Baltimore is a Black and brown city, predominantly Black and brown city. But most people do not know a little bit of the history around why Baltimore City is not a local agency. It was at one point in time when it was created back in 1784, but during the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and many of the racial justice movement of that era in the 50s and the 60s, in the 70s, what was a custom was the practice that so many racist white people or white supremacists or white nationalists actually were embedded inside of the local police department, right? And so we all hopefully know a little bit of the history of police coming out of the tradition of slave catching. And so during this particular period in history, many of the police departments or police officers were in fact engaged in racist policing, trying to uphold the system that was created to destroy or suppress or oppress Black lives. And so unfortunately, in 1956, I believe, unfortunately, there was an election that happened where there were white supremacists and violence as a result of that election. And the police department, unfortunately, stood by during this time period and allowed sort of havoc and chaos to wreak havoc inside of the city of Baltimore. That particular incident, that violence as a result of the election to try to institute a candidate who would essentially be mayor to uphold the system of white supremacy and many racist policies, that election led to a 1960 bill that was passed in the General Assembly that essentially stripped the city of its duties and its power to legislate its own police department. And without going too much into the weeds, a part of the reason why that is important is because Baltimore, again, is the only major city inside of the country, and we haven't found research anywhere else inside of the country where local police department or local city council and city does not have control over its police department. So that 1960 bill essentially stripped control of the police department from elected officials, and therefore stripping it from accountability on the part of the citizens' ability to hold elected officials in that they represent inside of their own local municipality, the ability to hold them accountable, to holding the police department accountable, right? So over the years, since 1960, small amounts of power has been restored to the Baltimore City Police Department, including its ability to hire its police chief. Before the 1960 bill set up a commission of police commissioners that were appointed by the state. Since then, the city, particularly the mayor, has regained power to be able to appoint its police chief inside of Baltimore, inside of the Baltimore Police Department. But the legislative power, the ability for the city council to both legislate policies that the police officers and the police department are mandated to follow, and the ability to enforce those policies do not rest within the hands, still to this day, do not rest in the hands of local leaders, right? So 60 years later, literally 60 years later, we find ourselves where Baltimore remains the only city in the nation that cannot enforce its police officers to essentially be accountable to the citizens, or cannot enforce its police officers to abide by policies that would be beneficial for the citizens of Baltimore City. Now, that's important for a number of reasons. One is that Baltimore City pays all of the settlements for any police misconduct or police brutality cases, right? Baltimore City provides the majority and has always provided the majority and almost all of the funding for the police department. So that's everything from all of the equipment to the salaries that the police officers make, right? And yet, even with it having all of the budgetary responsibilities for the Baltimore City Police Department, it still has no legal remedy to enforce legislation or policy on the police department. So simply put, it cannot create any real meaningful police reform, right? So even the little bit of power that other local jurisdictions have over their police departments to essentially mandate that they do certain things, Baltimore City is not allowed to do that in this case. Some would call this taxation without representation, right? The citizens literally foot the bill for an entire agency that it doesn't control, right? It doesn't have any power to elect the folks who are able to legislate this police department. And so it is essentially the equivalent of a modern taxation without representation. And so, I'll end off by talking about why it's important. So it's important for a number of reasons, including all of the things that I've mentioned. But one of the most important reasons about why it's important is it actually has a little bit to do with the story of Freddie Gray. And so I'll tell the story of Freddie Gray. Many of us know who was a young man who was killed by the police department by shattering over 70% of his spinal cord. Immediately following the Baltimore uprising, local city council members wanted to take up legislation that would institute body cameras. Body cameras, and I'm sorry, I'm just reminded that it was 1860 and not 1960. I'm sorry, apologize if I said 1960. And so many elected officials wanted to take up body camera legislation that essentially would make sure that there was some independent way of tracking police misconduct and police accountability, right? And so many of us will remember during 2015, immediately following both the Ferguson uprising and the Baltimore uprising, the hot thing to talk about was essentially body cameras. And what we've discovered was that the city council passed a bill to ensure that both the police department had funding for body cameras and also mandated them to wear body cameras, but they had no legal way to enforce it because the city police department was under state control and it was labeled a state agency. And so what the police commissioner told us at the time was that in order for this bill to be enforceable, you would have to go through the state legislature. And so they're beginning an entire fight to go through the state legislature to essentially institute a bill that regulated the use of body cameras on Baltimore City Police Department officers. And so that's just one of many examples of how the city cannot even enforce, even in valid, justifiable cases, policies that would make sense, that would create transparency, that would create accountability. That's just one example of essentially how police departments and police officers are not legislated and or controlled by the local government. And so we hope that you all will join us in this fight to ensure that Baltimore is the accountable and transparent city and has an accountable and transparent police department that is accountable to the people that pay its salaries. Come this legislative session, we hope that you will support the bill with us.
Trey, thank you very much. We appreciate you. We're running a little short on time, as we mentioned, but we urge everybody to hang in there. We're wrapping up soon. We're going to take only a few questions since we are short on time. So thank you all for submitting your questions in the chat. First question comes from Josh Davis, and this question is for Davon Love of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Question is, now that Bobby Zirkin has retired, who are the key legislators we need to put pressure on with calls and emails? Davon, that's for you.
That's a good question. I'll say a few things. Given the current moment that we're in, and it's important for people to know that Maryland is a Democratic Party stronghold. So as the question implies, the Democrats have the ability to pass whatever piece of legislation needed to pass with a veto-proof majority. Given the current moment that we're in, very few legislators will speak up and against issues of police accountability. And so while there aren't, I would say, particular legislators who are individually, big obstacles, I would say two things. One is that it's often been certain areas of the state that I call like purple districts. So these are areas where they may have Democrats, but they're fairly conservative. And so that's parts of Baltimore County, parts of Harford County, parts of Howard County, parts of Anne Arundel County. These are places where you have less concentrated Democratic Party control. And you have instances where they have constituencies that are much more conservative on issues of policing. So if you happen to know folks that live in those areas, again, parts of Baltimore County, parts of Howard County, Harford County, and Arundel County, those places that tend to be more conservative, it'll be important for folks to make sure you pressure those legislators and let them know with an election coming up in 2022 that they're going to be in danger of losing their seat if they don't support these efforts. The second thing I would say is that, as we know, the Maryland General Assembly is very leadership driven. At least traditionally, it's been very leadership driven. And so our two presiding officers, Speaker Adrienne Jones, who, as people probably are aware, has come out and said that she supports the repeal of LEOBR, which is a good step. There's still more to go in terms of what we need the presiding officers to support, but that's a great first step. So we need to make sure we pressure Speaker of the House of Delegates, Adrienne Jones, and also pressure the president of the Maryland State Senate, Bill Ferguson, who represents Baltimore City. Adrienne Jones represents Baltimore County. And so we need to make sure that if you want to put maximum pressure, we need to put maximum pressure on those presiding officers, because ultimately, if they tell their chambers that a bill needs to come out, it will come out. And so I would say, let's put as much pressure we can on those presiding officers.
All right, thank you, Davon. We appreciate you. Next question is from Justin Hasford. And that question is, how can we get involved to help on this? Yeah, Annette, that question is for you. How can we get involved to help on this?
Well, you'll find in the chat a link to a survey of how you'd like to get involved. There's so many ways that we can use your help to make sure that we pass these demands. So it really depends on what it is that you're available to do, whether that's phone banking, emailing, meeting with your legislators, hosting small groups with your neighbors to talk about these demands. It's really up to how you're willing and able to contribute. So I'm going to drop that chat in that link in the chat again, and follow us on both our social media and sign up on our listserv, because we're constantly putting out information, constantly talking about our next coalition meeting. So I'm going to drop that in the chat again.
Those of you who have questions, we're wrapping up now, but for those of you who have questions, don't worry, we will get them answered. We will be sending out information for you to get connected with some of these amazing leaders after the event has concluded. So in concluding, thank you all. Thank you to all of our powerful speakers tonight. Thank you to all who listened and shared their comments. We've heard some painful stories tonight, but we've heard some powerful calls to action as well. Our community is growing, the movement is growing, and this is just the beginning. From now through April, we need to be pushing our elected leaders to do the right thing and enact the critical reforms we've discussed here tonight. You can take action right now by writing to your legislators. If you don't know who your legislator is or your legislators are, you can visit MDElect, that's MDELECT.net, and look up your address. You should be able to find that information there. Sign up to participate in the next MCJPA meeting. You will get follow-up emails after this event if you're registered. And if you didn't, please take a look into the chat box to see a link to sign up to get involved. The time is now. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you. Thank you for participating. Looking forward to continuing this conversation and continuing in this struggle together. I'm Sean Yos. Have a good evening. Thank you. Be encouraged.